Hello, good evening, and welcome to this launch of the Little Book of Humanist Weddings, a lockdown launch. Well, not in lockdown, as you know, technically at the moment, but a socially distant, COVID cautious book launch, like so many that we've had in the last couple of years, very much like the socially distant online book launch we had for the original Little Book of Humanism. We're delighted to see you. It's wonderful to be here virtually together, if not physically together. My name's Andrew Copson. I'm the Chief Executive of Humanist UK and the author, together with Alice Roberts, of the Little Book of Humanism and now the Little Book of Humanist Weddings. And I'm very pleased to be joined here this evening by Alice Roberts, President of Humanist UK, and as I say, the second author of the Little Book of or joint first author of the Little Book of Humanism and now the Little Book of Humanist Weddings, by Zena Birch, with whom we wrote this book, led the Celebrant input to this book very ably, very beautifully, very profoundly, very wisely, being a celebrant of some years' experience and highly reviewed. And I've been lucky to attend many weddings that she's led herself and been thrilled by every one of them. And also joined this evening by another of our excellent celebrants, Audrey Simmons, there we are, who's also appeared now, who, uninvolved in the book, has come to tell us her own honest celebrant's opinion of it, which we're all on the edge of our seat to find out what it might be. So this evening, we're going to all say a little bit from our different perspectives about the book, about humanist weddings, their nature, the joy of them, how wonderful they are, and so on. And then you will have the opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. And pour yourself a glass of cheap white wine. There goes Zena, show us your cheap white wine, so that in true book launch fashion, we can enjoy ourselves in that accustomed manner. Well, Alice, I think that you're going to start us off by saying a little bit about how this book came to be as the successor volume to our original Little Book of Humanism.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everybody this evening. Really glad to see so many people joining us this evening. I mean, that is the joyous thing about doing remote book launches, that we can probably fit more of you in than we could have done in a real live bookshop. But it would be nice to be getting out and doing live events. And we have plenty of live events coming up for Humanist UK, including Darwin Day, of course, one of my favourites in February. So Little Book of Humanist Weddings is the follow-up to our original Little Book of Humanism, which I'm sure you've all got. And if you haven't got it, why not? And you must rush out and buy it for all your friends as well. What we wanted to do with the Little Book of Humanism was create a book that you could dip into. I think that was the main thrust of it. That when I became president of Humanist UK, I really wanted to bring together some of the history of humanism, the fantastic humanist knowledge through the centuries, and make it a bit more accessible. There are some amazing books out there. And there are some smaller books, but I wanted to chatted to Andrew about this and said, can't we make something which is just a little bit more accessible, the kind of thing that you would just pick up and leaf through? And what's been lovely about it is the response to it. I mean, it's gone down incredibly well, and I've had amazing responses from people on social media. First of all, showing me the Little Book of Humanism on tour all over the place, in lots of interesting places, but also telling me what it means to them. So people saying that they've read it cover to cover in a day or two. Other people saying that they very much dip into it on a daily basis, and it's just full of lots of inspiring and very thought-provoking excerpts from all sorts of different sources. And that's what's wonderful about humanism. We're not stuck with a sacred text. We don't have one set of literature to look to. We have got the whole wealth of non-religious literature, which is enormous, stretching back through centuries and millennia, indeed, right back to ancient Greece and ancient India. So that was the Little Book of Humanism, and we were really excited and pleased at how well it did. I mean, we thought it would do well because I think the world was crying out for it, but it was lovely to see it flying. And then we thought, what can we do next? And very naturally, the idea came about for the Little Book of Humanist Weddings. Some of the most important work that Humanist UK does, I think, alongside all of the human rights work that they do, alongside the work about fighting discrimination against non-religious people that still exists in the UK, a really, really important strand of their work is supporting the training of humanist celebrants for naming ceremonies, weddings, and funerals. And those important points in our lives are often when people start thinking about humanism, because we are living in an increasingly secular society. Most of us in Britain are not religious. We know that from the British Social Attitudes Survey over the last few years, that more than half of the population says they're not religious. It's very difficult. It's different with the census. If you go to people in the census and say, what's your religion? You'll end up with more than half of people saying that they have a religion because they kind of have one traditionally, or perhaps their parents had one. But if you ask people, are you religious? More than half of the British population says no. And that's reflected in what people want to do when they come to mark those important points in their lives. And we've seen humanist weddings just taking off enormously. And we now have humanist weddings legal in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Humanist weddings in Scotland, I think it's right to say, Andrew, are larger in number than either Church of Scotland and I think Catholic weddings put together. I think that's right. The biggest group of weddings, and still growing. Yeah. So there's a huge appetite out there. They're legal in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and then we have this very strange discriminatory situation in England and Wales, unfortunately, where humanist weddings are not legal. That doesn't mean you can't have one. It just means that you have to have the registration as well, rather like marriages in France. But it does mean we're not on an equal footing with religious people. So that's slightly irksome. Anyway, that aside, we thought it would be lovely to put together a book which brings together, again, a lot of thoughtful material from poets and novelists and writers of various ilks, but then also to work with our lovely humanist celebrants and particularly Zena. And Zena's voice runs through this book, and it's absolutely wonderful. So that's how the Little Book of Humanist Weddings came about. It'll be really interesting to talk to Zena and Audrey tonight about how they use it when they're helping couples to plan weddings. But I think what we also hoped was that it would be useful for the couples as well, that people who are thinking about a humanist wedding might find something useful in the Little Book of Humanist Weddings. And not just people who are thinking about getting married. Maybe people who are in any kind of relationship might find interesting thoughts about humanism and relationships in this book. So I'm going to stop talking there.
And I think that you're right. I think that is how it has been used. I was walking through Russell Square just a few weeks ago, well, it must be longer than that now, actually, in November, and a man came up to me and said, "Excuse me, did you write the Little Book of Humanism?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Did you write the Little Book of Humanist Weddings?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm getting married and I have bought the Little Book of Humanist Weddings." I said, "That's amazing." He said, "Yes, thank you, Anthony, for all that you do." But anyway, at least it proved that it is out in the wild and being used. And it's definitely a little handbook that people are putting their hands on and buying for their friends if they know that they're thinking about getting married. Zena, we divided, as you know, into those three sections: love, wedding, and marriage, all of which were equally important, and all of which were aspects of the whole that Celebrants gave us a lot of very important contributions to, because they were all the different aspects of the work of being a celebrant and bringing a couple together that are of importance. How did you find the process of looking at yourself, examining your own practice and that of other celebrants in the context of putting it together into a little book like this? Because, as Alice said, of course, you were indispensable to the whole endeavour.
Oh, thank you. Well, I find, well, first of all, I was hugely privileged to be asked to kind of do the role that I had, which was in many respects to kind of look and inform some of that content and creation from on the ground work, I guess. I've been a celebrant for 11 years and conducted many weddings in that time. So whereas I wouldn't say I'm an expert, what I would say is I'm a continuing to learn developmental practitioner. And so actually writing this book was hugely, insightful, I guess, not just to creating the book, but also to my own practice, and I hope every celebrant's practice as well. Just to quickly add, I know the book is out there because at 2 weddings this year, the book was given away in a wedding raffle. So I was very pleased about that. But what I think was the most exciting part of being asked to help was the fact that both you and Alice knew that the Celebrant network, the celebrants that we have within the network are a vital and rich source of information as well. And so I guess if we're looking at how the book sort of took its journey, one of the things that was most exciting for me was being able to reach out to all of our network of celebrants, and those who had the time and the energy and the ability got back to me, and taking everything that they sent to me and developing that was so exciting. I remember, Andrew, and I think you might remember this too, there was something fascinating even about just chapter creation, because in its own way, creating each chapter was an idea of how we were distilling what's actually fundamentally important to love and to marriage, especially in this sort of humanist context. So then reaching out to celebrants and asking them whether they had some, rich material to add to it. And I think what's wonderful is obviously celebrants have to hand this incredible wealth of poetry and prose and things that they hear over the years that either they've sourced or found themselves, or that couples have given them, or couples guests when they're doing a reading will discover something that we wouldn't have even thought of. And all of those things become this really rich ingredient list of things that we were able to take from to inform the book. But also celebrants have this wisdom in a way. There's probably a bunch of celebrants out there now going, we're not wise, but there is an accidental wisdom that comes from just observation and working with people. And there's a wonderful bit in the book where it says that there's as many paths to love as there are humans, and I'd argue perhaps even more. And what celebrants get this incredible insight into is each of those individual paths. We find out from couples their story, and these are real stories. These aren't fictionalized. These aren't made up. These aren't aspirational per se. These are actually the things that have really happened to them. So being able to tap into so many other celebrants and get some of those stories. And I'm really proud in the book that alongside some of these notable humanist writers from as Alice was saying, the wealth of history and time, we also have the words of celebrants in there from things that they've done. There's these wonderful little excerpts from scripts that you can find throughout, which also shows you the variation and different voices that scripts within humanist ceremonies can embrace, as well as all of these different quotes and findings. And so there's certain parts of the book which are quite practical, which if you are a celebrant or if you're a couple getting married, you can use as source material. So, looking at why it's important choosing where you want to get married. And then there's other parts of the book where the chapters are just so active. So the obvious one is the Promises and Vows chapter. It's a really proactive chapter. I think if you're a couple struggling or not even struggling, actually, I shouldn't say that, because I think the process of wanting to write personal vows is going to be one of the most daunting things that anyone is ever going to set themselves up to do. You have a blank piece of paper and then you're hoping to write some of the most important words you're ever going to say out loud. And the Promises and Vows chapter is perhaps the one that's the most full of celebrant input, because we sourced permission from a number of couples to see if we could use their actual vows as examples, although personal vows are precisely that, deeply personal. So you can't just cut and paste them. But also there's really active hints and tips and activities and things that you can do with couples to help them find that whole process a whole lot less daunting. And I think that chapter in the book is this really active one. And yeah, it makes me quite proud to think that we had a network of experience we could draw from to just make that as rich as possible.
It was so impressive. Our Celebrant network is so creative and diverse, and there was scarcely a theme or a question or an aspect of anything to do with love or marriage or weddings. Everything from the first meeting to the lifelong commitment, that they didn't have at least 20 different opinions and stories and examples of. That was absolutely wonderful. And you're right, actually, it was quite humbling in a way to have that brought home to us again, especially those of us who don't always get beyond the office or beyond the working day of Humanist UK, to just remember how many tens of thousands of human experiences and lives we're touching every year through our organisation's work.
Yeah, there's one excerpt actually from Humanist celebrant Laura Gimson, which kind of reiterates what you were saying, Zena. I used to think we all loved in roughly the same way, but actually the specificity of love is what keeps my job as a celebrant so interesting. It's a joy to uncover the many and varied ways that we humans show our fondness for one another. It is that kind of diversity, isn't it? Audrey, what did you think of it in terms of that diversity of voice coming through?
I think it was really helpful. You work as a celebrant and you're by yourself, really. It's just you and a couple, and you're trying to, scratch your brain to try and find how you can actually sort of encapsulate what couples are feeling and thinking and what they want. And so it was nice to have a book that had sort of all my colleagues had some input in, and you can kind of just tap into them and kind of use their experience. So it was a way of having a whole sort of celebrant kind of club together in just a little book, so that I can just tap into their experiences and just kind of go, okay, so they've done this, or actually that triggers something else. And you can just, it was just kind of having a little pool of just of information and experience in a book. And so I found that really useful, because you're usually just struggling, and trying to find things for yourself in various ways. And so, it's been really nice. And the way that it set out the chapters and all those kind of things, and just that it is so varied, that it isn't one experience. You've got a whole different tone or that people are trying to create, and a whole different atmosphere. And so the book really helps you kind of tune into that, into your couples, and gives you a kind of baseline and some, just so you're not just kind of scratching around for yourself.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think I hope to the book that it might inspire people to start thinking about their own humanist weddings, but I wonder if it inspires people to get involved as celebrants as well. I wonder if people pick it up and think, I think I could do that. I think I'd really enjoy that. Anyway, listen, we've got some questions coming in already now.
Well, there's a good question apropos of that very point, actually, the first question that we've got. Because I think you're right, we have had people who are thinking of being celebrants pick up the book and learn more about it. And in fact, the first question here is from someone who's about to start their wedding celebrant training, who's obviously come to this event this evening. They're curious to know, this is a question for the celebrants with us, about the more challenging aspects of being a wedding celebrant. What challenges do you face?
Oh,
from the heart, Zena. What's the worst thing that's ever happened?
So many answers to this. Do you know, on the whole, without sounding horribly twee, it is just one of the greatest jobs in the world. But I think there is, it's a job that continually keeps you on your toes, and no individual person is going to be the same in terms of how you manage to draw information from them. And I guess one of the most fundamentally important things about a humanist ceremony is that it is created around the people it's intended for. And so you can't just sort of waltz in and assume that you're going to get the same information and the same depth of thought from every single person you encounter. And so as a celebrant, you need to be able to read people's cues. You need to understand what people are really happy to share and what people are far too personal and private to share, but still really want to have a personalized ceremony. And so there is a real deftness of touch, I think, that makes certain elements of the job tricky, but there aren't any real major scandalous things. People always want to know terribly scandalous things, like, oh, what's the worst thing that's ever happened at a wedding? I think everybody thinks that 1 in 3 weddings has someone running in going, no, she's already married, or something. That doesn't really happen.
No, I'd agree. I think the things that you've got a short amount of time to try and link with, bond with, trying to understand a couple, what they need, what they want. And sometimes they come in, they're not very clear about what they want. They don't know what they want. And you've got to sit down there and kind of eke it out of them in some ways, and try and kind of give them, would you like this? Would you like that? Would you like what? And then suddenly, when they suddenly hit their stride, they want everything in there. And you're kind of thinking, no, you can't have, ring binding and hand binding and candles and all of it. And you have to kind of slow them down. So I think it's just challenging in terms of managing what people want, or understanding exactly what they want, and trying to interpret what it is that couples actually want when they don't know, or they've heard about so many other things and they want everything in there. So it's just about managing people and understanding people and trying to give them what they want, and sort of walking them through that process, and so that they come out thinking, actually, yeah, that I ended up getting what I wanted and what I needed. It's just managing people, really.
guess it's about authenticity and honesty in what you include, I think, and there's a really, really good chapter in the book on challenging traditions, and it's one of my favorite chapters in the book, and actually one of the ones that I find the most important. There's a really wonderful, I think it's a Somerset Maugham quote that says, tradition is a guide, not a jailer. And I think, especially from a humanist perspective, that's so important to remember, that tradition and symbolic gesture and so many of the things that rites of passage are often so jam-packed with, they kind of need to have a relevance. There's no point in them being just echoey repetitions of days gone by. And so to really think about why it is that people are including things into their ceremony, or discovering things that are important to them along the process, I think is really important. And I guess there's a friend of mine made a joke that the book, she read it and she said the book is so comprehensive in some ways that maybe I should just turn up, throw the book down and say, read it. Let's chat afterwards, which I think is a really positive sign that we've packed it with the right things. But without being facetious about that, there are so many elements within that book that if you are considering whether even marriage is for you, a lot of people are very happy living and cohabitating and being as they are, and they might think that the whole process of marriage is antiquated or patriarchal or something they're not interested in. And actually, I think this book is a really good way of bringing those modern values and the changing circumstances of why people choose to get married these days. It's a real kind of modern look, I think, at love, and all of the implications that go with it. And so I think the book isn't just for people who are planning on getting married. It can be really, really beneficial to those who don't even think it's an institution they want to be part of. It can be really good for people who are already married and, love's a verb, and want to remain active in their relationship. And there's some great chapters towards the end about eyes wide open and embracing change and things that are fundamentally important to marriage, not just a wedding. And so although it is the Little Book of Humanist Weddings and it specifically looks at that as a rite of passage, hopefully the book kind of really takes us, through the whole journey and process of what will hopefully be, marriage, love, all encompassing, I guess.
Yeah.
And how about you, Audrey? What kind of issues have you sort of come across, and what are the kind of struggles that you've kind of faced as a celebrant? What would you say to somebody who's setting out to be a celebrant?
It's knowing who you are and understanding that what makes you comfortable. You have to go in being comfortable with yourself, being comfortable with the whole situation, but also being prepared for who's going to turn up in front of you. People are different. So being and allowing couples to be themselves, to not feel that, and if they do want to do something traditional, then that's okay. But really trying to kind of stretch people. People are traditional because it's what they know, it's what's comfortable, it's what's recognized, it's what Auntie Maisie will understand who's in there, what Granny will understand. And it's trying to help them to grow and actually understand that they have everything that that's out there to include and to think about. And it's just helping them thinking about it. And sometimes that can be a struggle because people are comfortable, and so it is those conversations. So if you're starting out, be open to what people are telling you, be open, but also create your own little tool bag of things that you can sort of, and how you're going to bring things in, how you're going to introduce things to people who may never have thought about it, who don't know anything about humanist weddings. They just want something that's different, that reflects them. And so sometimes you can just hear what they're saying and think, well, actually, have you thought of this? Have you tried this? And you can see their little faces going, I can do that. Can I do that? Is that allowed? There's some kind of rule book on how humanist weddings are to be. So it's just about being open, really, and just being ready to take on, a couple and the family, and recognize that you're not just marrying a couple. There is the whole family to think about as well, and to kind of include that and to think about that, so that you get a whole complete kind of ceremony as well.
Thank you. Some lovely questions coming in. I'd like to bring in this one at this point, which is a very general one, actually. What are the benefits of a humanist wedding ceremony? So what's special, and what is so great about a humanist wedding ceremony? Zena?
Yeah. Well, or the biased answer, is there the most interesting for all of your guests? It doesn't really matter what your guests' own personal belief systems are. Actually, a humanist ceremony is focused on the thing that everyone has in common. And so I suppose that's one of the things that makes a humanist ceremony really inclusive. And I think in terms of, for couples at least, I think it's probably the fact that there's a process, that you don't just have to pick a date, turn up and show your passport, do all of the sort of box ticking jobs. You actually have to work with your celebrant and look at why you're choosing to get married. And that question often gets lost, I think, in the whole event planning of a wedding. And most people aren't event planners. So they often get quite overwhelmed by what a wedding is, because they're ending up having to make these decisions that are much bigger than things they know. But when a celebrant, and therefore in a humanist ceremony, what we're doing is we're trying to draw out the reasons for all of these things. Hopefully that allows and helps people to understand why they're making some of the choices that they're making. But most importantly, it's allowing them the opportunity to reflect and the opportunity to look back and think and watch the journey they've taken together so far, and, you know, the journey that they have as yet to see or experience, which is the day after and then onwards after their wedding day. So I think the thing that a humanist ceremony brings you is just so much more thought and preparation, perhaps even. I know a lot of couples sort of reflect that back to me, at least, that it was reassuring to them in the end that they didn't just pick a bunch of colours and names for tables, but they actually really thought about why they was, you know, having a very often expensive day.
I think what humanist weddings are flexible. They can be tailored, they can be crafted. And I think that's really important, that when you leave the day, everyone feels that they've played a part in it, so that it isn't just about the couple. You can tailor a wedding so that everyone feels that they were experienced in it, they experienced it. And I think that's sort of gives everyone something to take away, and then everyone feels that actually this wasn't just about a couple, it wasn't about just what was said. You can create an emotion, you can create a feeling, and as Maya Angelou said, you always remember how people made you feel rather than what was said. So that's what you're trying to create, is that emotion and that feeling.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it, that it's not I mean, as experienced celebrants, you must have not necessarily patterns that you're fitting people into, but you must have ideas about how the ceremonies could run. But really importantly, they're not formulaic. There's not a kind of single formula that you're just dropping a couple of names into without really knowing those people. It's kind of from the ground up, isn't it?
Yeah, and the content within every ceremony, the words that go inside it, you can't just pick up and drop into another person's ceremony. You know, as it would make, I'm sure, plenty of people's lives a lot easier if you could just write eloquently about love and then stick a couple of names in here and there. But actually, a humanist ceremony is very much about the people involved, not just their combined voice, but their separate voices too. So each ceremony is so distinctly unique. It is so something that can only be crafted between your celebrant and your couple, and that's something that you can't really replicate or cheat.
I'll come back to something that Audrey said about how everyone's going to take something away from this, because, when they've been to a humanist wedding, one of the questions we've had is, how much do you consider the needs of the friends and relatives who are there to celebrate with them? And I think one of the things that comes over in the book is that is one of the most important things. Just as the ceremony, a humanist wedding ceremony, is personalised to the couple, it also is personalised to the whole of the community that's gathered there in that moment to witness and participate in and be the ongoing sort of observers and participants in the relationship. I know that's something that you were very keen in writing about, Zena, and I think there's a long passage for me about that.
Yes, there is. But it was interesting to me that it was very much a lot of what a lot of the different celebrants responding back to me was. It's really interesting when you take the fact that you aren't, because we still have this finicky thing in England and Wales where we can't actually conduct the legal ceremony at the moment. What's actually really interesting is how important that sense of accountability amongst your guests is. And I often talk to people about, it's very rare in a humanist ceremony that you have guests just making up bums on seats or making up numbers. Most of the time, and every celebrant fed this back to me, it's very much about your support network, your community, people whose opinions actually matter to you. And so when you are creating a ceremony, you do bear this in mind. It's really important to get a sense of who their guests are. And that's as important if the guests only make up 4 or 5 people, or if they make up 128. It's still about who that support network is. And by expressing what's important to you, and that transaction of people listening and being invested back, which is often what happens when you're genuinely talking about things that everyone in the room is interested in. There's a wonderful quote, I hope I'm going to find it. It was by a celebrant, Jeanette Smith. It's on page 134. I wrote this earlier. Here it is. She wrote, "By interweaving the story of your relationship origin and development, the highs and lows, the idiosyncrasies, the moments guests themselves will recognize being part of, everyone in the gathering will become invested in the outcome. Not only that, everyone will want to continue adding to that story as the days, months, and years go by." And I think this is it. It is about how when you make a kind of a commitment like this out loud and in public, then you're going to be held accountable by those people. And that memory, the memory that you create with everybody in the room, is essentially the difference between what happened the day before and the day after. Like, not an awful lot changes in modern life because most people live with each other and they understand their inner workings, and the sort of day before being married and the day after being married isn't enormously different, except for what gets created in the room and the memories that are made and shared with everyone who is there. So guests are a really fundamental part to that, I think.
There's some interesting questions about the kind of inclusivity of humanist weddings, which we've touched on a little bit, but inclusivity in terms of if you have a range of different religious people coming along to the wedding, or even actually if you've got a humanist marrying a religious person, and how can a humanist wedding work with that kind of couple? I would have thought it's perfect, because humanism at its heart is secular. That's what it's about. It's about respecting everybody's faiths and belief systems. I don't know if you'd like to pick up on that, Audrey.
It's exactly that. And I've married a couple who themselves were humanists. One partner came from a Muslim background and another one was from a sort of Scottish Baptist background, so 2 very strong religious backgrounds. And they were, we were just sitting there trying to think about how we include them, and we chose our words. And it isn't about it's about finding that common ground. People are there to support a couple, and people have beliefs and thoughts, but those thoughts are very common. It's about love, it's about togetherness, and they want to see the couple in front of them happy and, regardless of their faith. So those are the things that you can draw on. You draw on the things that make people human, and you draw on the things that are recognizable to whoever you are from wherever you come from. So being able to just pick on those things and pick them out and make them explicit, and then everyone feels that actually you're representing me. I'm sitting here in this humanist wedding in my hijab, and I'm sitting here, with my, it's all of those things that you can bring without anyone feeling that there's any kind of threat or anything. They can feel comfortable and recognize. And if you craft it well enough, then everyone leaves feeling actually this wasn't sometimes humanists are seen as being attacking, but that isn't what we are. We are about making it inclusive. And so when it's actually there and you're able to do it, and people come up to you afterwards and say, actually, that was really nice, you can suddenly realize that actually that's what humanism is about, and people can see it in action. And I think that's a lot of things. People don't see humanism in action, and when they see it, they can kind of feel comfortable with it. And you've created something that includes everybody, and no one has to feel threatened by anything.
There are also these wonderful, cultural expressions of love and commitment that exist across the world. And now that we all, travel more than 30 miles from where we were born, we're exposed to them. And so that sort of sense of acknowledging what we have, our commonality as opposed to our differences, is really important, and especially when, like you say, Alice, you've got, you know, a couple who are coming from two different religious backgrounds, but who together don't share either of the religious beliefs. That's not to say they don't respect the traditions that are part of their heritage. One of the very first weddings that I think Andrew was at that I did was of one of his friends who entered on a incredibly well decorated horse as part of the Hindu tradition. I think ultimately they'd wanted an elephant, but obviously that wasn't possible, but the horse was brilliant.
I think they should have held out for an elephant.
So do I. But what's brilliant about that is it's really embracing and welcoming parts of a culture that have used expressions as a way of trying to transmit kind of ideas and thoughts and love and connectivity, and you know, the exchange of garlands between two different families. I mean, we would be absolutely ridiculous to say we can't include things like that because it isn't humanist.
I think that's one of the best bits in the book, actually, is when you look at the things like the tea ceremonies, or the hand fasting, or the sand blending, or when one partner's from a Jewish background, the different traditions that you might follow, which are, you know, secular, non-religious traditions, cultural traditions, the Persian ones and the Polish ones and the Russian ones. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And it was also where there was some quite good quotes, as it were, from humanists about the nature of tradition and the nature of culture, because I think that's a really important point, is that a lot of people, when they find they don't have religious beliefs, they still have all sorts of very valuable and meaningful cultural identities and cultural traditions, which have a lot to speak to, you know, their own interpretation of their relationship and their families as well. And I think that's really great. I mean, the wedding that you're talking about, I think that made, you know, a big difference to that day, to the nature of the ceremony and everyone's from different families' feelings about what was actually going on.
And everyone came away feeling like they knew a little bit more about perhaps the other side, the other couple's guests.
Exactly, you know, different ways of showing love and everything else.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we're a rich and varied race. We should be really capable of celebrating all of those things.
We've got some really, really specific questions, but they're quite interesting, Alice. Should we do some of the specific ones people have? Where there was one that was really...
Tony and Zoe want advice about getting married this summer.
Advice, Tony and
very
Zoe.
Specific.
Yeah, that is specific.
I would say start with this.
And carry on from there.
And find yourself a very good celebrant.
I can't see Tony and Zoe.
People are joining us from all over the place. We've got people asking about, can you get a humanist wedding in Sweden? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
And we have there's a very large and active humanist organization in Sweden, which is Humanist, also a member of Humanist International.
Yeah. Oh, this is quite an interesting, very specific one. If you've got children from previous partnerships, you know, this is something that is covered in the book, actually. It'd be interesting to hear about examples that Zena and Audrey have had, maybe, because it's another good thing about humanist ceremonies is that it recognises the reality of people's complicated lives and the situations that we're in. Rishi says he or she, lucky enough to be marrying Julie next month, who fondly recalls, by the way, Alice, that you used to donate blood for her research projects at university. So that's something very
excellent
humanist too. And they each have a child from previous partnerships they'd like to acknowledge in some ways and an integral part of that blended family. What can ceremonies do to incorporate that?
So obviously, this comes up quite a lot. One of the things that I think works really nicely, especially when you have, one of the things that's really important to remember with children actually is that it's an incredibly highly emotional event. So you actually want to be really careful with the age groups of the children when you make suggestions, because there are certain things which are just a bit overwhelming for anyone under a certain age. And so you kind of want to be careful about that. So there's lots of lovely ways, if that's the case, where you can include symbolic gestures that include the children so that they're only being asked to participate in something, not to actually express or say anything or try to find an emotional articulation, which is often quite difficult, especially when there's a lot of expectant eyes on you. But if you've got children of a certain age and you're able to really communicate with them, I often include children in some of my couple meetings so that I get to know them and I'm not a stranger to them. Again, it's just so much nicer to create a really safe and familiar space so that when the ceremony arrives, everybody who is vitally important to it, feels relaxed and comfortable inside it. A lot of couples, and I think this is really special actually, is they add family vows to their own personal vows. So they will perhaps make a statement of intent as a stepmother, or a statement of intent as a stepfather, or a statement of intent as a family. They might, add to those things a gift, or exchange something with the children too. There's a lovely thing when you're, if a couple want to do a hand fasting, where you actually ask the children to bring the ribbons or the cord or the climbing rope or whatever it is that's valid or important to the couple. And then they can not only carry it up, but also participate in the creating of that knot, and they end up creating a family knot, not just a marriage knot. And there's something really beautiful about that, not least because there aren't an awful lot of artifacts that you get to keep from the day. So when there are certain things that hold this kind of lovely symbolic intent that can be glanced at as days and weeks and months and years go by, it's really important. The other lovely thing is, if you have a child who likes to slam their painted hands on things, you can get them to sign a certificate with a big old handprint, so long as you have a baby wipe close to hand so it doesn't go over everybody else's wedding outfits. But that's a really lovely way of a 3-year-old in 12 years' time seeing that they were so clearly important on that day, because there's something so evident of the fact that they were there.
That's so lovely. I think, I mean, involving them in those really meaningful rituals, and then creating those lasting memories as well. That's fantastic. Audrey, how about you? Have you got any particular memories?
Well, we haven't done the certificate one. I'm taking that one. That's pocketing that one. Again, it is about giving. It depends on the age of the child, and it is sometimes just giving them a task, giving them bringing the rings up, giving them being part of that ceremony, and you sort of exchange rings, and then parents can exchange a gift or something with a child. And sometimes even the older children, I've done one with grown children, and bringing them into and they have, doing the family loving cup and things like that, so that the older children, even though the children are have their own children or are quite big, it's still about bringing them into that family as well and doing things with them. So it is about younger ones, giving them a task, giving them something to do, something to be a part of, but also remembering that, it's older children as well, and still making that, giving them something to do and being part of that, and creating a little space within the ceremony that is about the family, and being able to say, this is who we are now. So yeah, there's those little things that you can do. Sometimes an exchange of families, so you can have the bride's family and the groom's family, or one said families, however, and they kind of do a swap and say, well, I now embrace you into this family. So you can kind of sort of take one set of families and swap them over, and then they can give them a shawl or something, and say, if they sometimes have colors, and you can wrap them around them and say, you're now wearing our colors, you've now brought you into our family. You can do that with children as well, and bring them into the family and say, well, look, we're all one, and wrap them in things. So it's just about a task, and there's something that, again, is quite symbolic.
Also, children are super insightful, obviously, and often incredibly funny. So there's no reason to be po-faced about all of this. Like asking children what love means to them, asking them what they think their parents are getting married for, can bring forth some real gold. So if you can develop a relationship, or if your celebrant doesn't get a chance to do this, so answering specifically to the question that was asked, like ask them to answer a few questions, ask them what they think marriage means, ask them what they think love means, ask them how they think you can be successful in marriage, and just listen to what their insights are, because amongst the fact that there might be some funny answers, there's probably some elements of extraordinary, profound truth in them as well.
There's a number of people in the chat saying that or in the questions saying that they wish they had a humanist wedding when they got married, and a number of celebrants also pointing out there, which I will do now for the benefit of anyone who's at this event who feels the same as that renewal of vows ceremonies are also something that our celebrants do, and well worth doing, very enjoyable occasions they can be. There are now well over 40 questions we're never going to get in the next 14 minutes to all of them. But Alice, do you want to pick out a particular one, or I've got?
Well, there are a few that have asked a similar thing, which is kind of picking up on that, something we've covered already, which is the kind of the benefits, the advantages of a humanist wedding, but sort of, why should I choose a humanist celebrant to work with creating a wedding? And I think the important thing to say there is that humanist celebrants are part of a network, and they've been trained. So we do have independent celebrants, of course, but that they've been trained as humanist celebrants, and I think that's quite important to kind of know that when you're starting to look for somebody. I don't know what you think, Zena and Audrey, about that.
We're part of a network, and I think we've got that support. So you're not just working in isolation. It's not just you trying to create something. We've got colleagues, and I regularly go to my colleagues. We've got, got the WhatsApp groups. You've got all of these kind of connections that you can make for advice, for thoughts, for support, for all of those things. And I think once you've got that kind of network going on, it makes for a better, more informed celebrant. And I feel, once you feel supported, you also then feel braver and courageous to go out and support couples, because you've got a support network. And I think that's what I get from Humanist, being a Humanist UK celebrant, is that I know that I've got support. I know that I can ask, and I know that I can get a wealth of information and support back. And I think knowing that when I go out to meet couples, and I can say that to couples, that actually I'm from a network. I'm not just by myself. It's not me as an individual. It's a whole network and a whole pool that you're tapping into something much larger than just me as a single lone celebrant.
Yeah, there's some really interesting questions, aren't there? I mean, I've just spotted one here. I don't know, Andrew, if you know the answer to this. Can you say anything more about the fascinating history of humanists conducting humanist commitment ceremonies long before the law recognised same-sex couples relationships?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is something that we mention in the book, actually, don't we? We say that is the case. But in fact, it's something that we're very proud of as Humanist UK, is that we always have firstly, that ever since we started offering wedding ceremonies, which is over 100 years, they've always emphasised equality between men and women. Mm-hmm. That was something that was incredibly striking even in the late 1890s, is that we were contracting partnerships between individual men and women, and not sort of the old-fashioned patriarchal style of marriage, which we've also had some questions about in the chat too. But the second thing, of course, is that we offered the first same-sex commitment ceremonies, and certainly we were involved as well in the 80s and 90s with the London-based mass sort of, not like Mooney style, but like there were big events of lots of same-sex couples pledging their commitment publicly to each other. And Barbara Smoker, veteran humanist celebrant who unfortunately died just a couple of years ago, was the celebrant at a large number of those. So it's very much a part of our own tradition to be non-traditional in that way. That does link to a question that we had actually from Hester, who's also one of our celebrants, saying, that she is very inspired and thrilled and touched by the way that her couples are redefining marriage, in practice all the time, and that is leaving, for many people who are participating in that process, as we all are, moving society forward, leaving those old patriarchal problems behind. She wonders actually if Audrey and Zena have seen that too in the partnerships that they've been signing and sealing through their ceremonies.
Absolutely. I think it's mentioned in the book, but one of the things I love about the couples that find me is a very high percentage start our first meeting with, I don't really believe in marriage. and I always think, yes, you're my couple, because actually what that means is you've thought about it and you're actually here now because you have redefined what that means to you, and you are now ready to stand forth with your shoulders back and your head held high and make commitments out loud that are of your choosing. And I just think that it is absolutely one of the things that has, for the past 11 years at least, pushed me forward, is knowing that every ceremony that I conduct, often in a room full of guests who perhaps have never even been to a humanist ceremony before, sit there and think, and they come out the other side and they're like, wow, I know why I was here today. Like I wasn't just part of a ceremony because I'm contractually obliged so I can then have a nice dance and a drink in a minute. Like I'm here, and everything is based around these thoughts, and breaking those traditions, not just doing something for the sake of it, questioning it, challenging it, holding the wrong traditions aloft and arguing against them. I find these things quite fundamental to the job that we do.
Yeah, I agree. It's people recognizing that they can do something different and actually feeling relieved that they're not tied to something, that they can actually just say, well, actually, I just want this. I don't want any of that. This is what I want. And being able to say, actually, yes, you, of course you can have that. That is exactly what you can do. And that, and, you know, the kind of just sitting there thinking, oh, you know, thank goodness I can do what I am, what I want, be who I want to be. We can, you know, come down the aisle with however we want. We actually don't have to come down. I'm just going to turn up at the front. I'm just going to do whatever. I'm just going to be me in this space in this time. And I think it's really, it is, as you say, it is rewarding when you suddenly sort of, someone goes, no, I don't want to do that. That, you know, we're not even going to think about these. I want this, and this. And you go, yeah, okay. You know, we can run with this because actually you're feeling that this is something new and exciting, but also something that at the end of the day, we are a society that's changing, and to see that reflected and to be a part of that is absolutely thrilling for me, actually, as a humanist celebrant.
Mm. And the fact that Humanist UK pushes forward so many brilliant campaigns to help make change is a really nice sort of a foundation for us to stand upon as well. And I often find that couples are very aware of that. It's why they're finding a humanist celebrant and not just another, is because, you know, these are, you know, people are engaged in wanting to make real change in our present day lives and to do things positively and not correctly, because there's no, you know, correct for one is not necessarily correct for another, but I think you know what I mean. So it's a real privilege to be part of Humanist UK, not just the Celebrant network, knowing full well that hopefully there is that progressiveness, making a sort of something bigger than just us. I know it's only recently that they took, you know, what your father's occupation was off the registry question. I mean, that really is only something that's disappeared in the past couple of years. To think that that was even relevant is so insane. And so it's been so nice to be part of something that doesn't have to, you know, follow that kind of odd, just terribly archaic procedure.
I think that's the recipe for social change as well, isn't it? I mean, it's like our pastoral care work with humanist pastoral carers in prisons and hospitals and other settings. It's, you know, we're not just talking the talk of wanting social change and progress and all the things that we want. We're actually delivering as well the things that will help people move forward in their own lives to achieve those things and change society along the way. And I think that's quite, you know, that's quite important. You see it in humanist organizations all over the world. They're platforms for social change, they're advocating, but they're also delivering, supporting side by side with people and helping people at those difficult times. Someone's asking here a question which is quite interesting, because I didn't expect this to be the case, but then it did turn out to be the case. They're asking, is the book as much about love as it is about weddings? And actually it is. It's a lot about love. And you know, when I started thinking about this, I kept turning up terrible humanist quotes about love, like love is a chemical, marriage is a prison type, sort of old rationalist type humanist quotes. I thought, oh my goodness, this is, you know, where are the sources of sort of humanist reflection on love? You know, we've got all the practical things that celebrants do in the real world to bring, you know, partners together and to celebrate and create the ceremonies that are about them. But are there sort of, did any humanists ever say nice things about love and be in love and were happy in love? And thankfully then it turned out that once we'd opened the floodgates, there were loads, like Alice said and Zena has said, of people, you know, from Mark Twain to Daphne du Maurier to all the you know, to ancient humanists as well.
It's amazing.
There was loads in there.
I just want to read out one of my favourite bits, if that's all right, before we finish, because it is so lovely, and it's Philip Pullman. I'll be looking at you every moment, every single moment, and when we do find each other again, we'll cling so tight that nothing and no one will ever tear us apart. Every atom of me and every atom of you will live in birds and flowers and dragonflies and pine trees and in clouds, and in those little specks of light you see floating in sunbeams. And when they use our atoms to make new lives, they won't just be able to take one, they'll have to take two. One of you and one of me will be joined so tight. They lay side by side, hand in hand, looking at the sky. Yes, it is about love as well as weddings.
It is.
The chapter on romance in particular, and how romance doesn't just have to be about, you know, romantic love, it can be about just the wonder of life, is just jam-packed full of exquisite quotes that are wonderful. So there's lots of wax.
Do you have a favourite bit? Did you have a favourite bit you wanted to read out?
I'll tell you one. It's a tiny one, that's why I can do it, but it's a classic Kurt Vonnegut. and it's tiny, but it means so much to me because it's about small gesture. And he just wrote, "They were lovebirds. They entertained each other endlessly with little gifts, sights worth seeing out of the plain window, amusing or instructive bits from things they read, random recollections of times gone by."
It's nice. Audrey, do you have anything, Audrey, that you particularly?
I didn't choose the ones on love. I don't know if that reflects a reflection on me. As a reflection on me, I was just thinking about what humanism and humanist weddings mean to me, and it was just one of the celebrants, and I think it's just me and my job. Jane Blackburn, she wrote something. I'll just read a little bit of it. When we gather for a humanist wedding, we are there to shout from the rooftops our delight for two people standing before us. They have found such an important relationship and connection, a bond so incredibly special that you are willing to commit to the partnership for the rest of your lives. And I just think for me, it's just about gathering. It's just about the fact that we found when people find each other. I think that's what I find, two people in this crazy, that we're running around, and you happen to bump into somebody and you find that connection. And I just think that's amazing for me, that you can find someone that you've got bits of them that you actually like and you want to be around them for a while. So
my favorite one actually is about marriage, not about love. It's the Grayson Perry quote about marriage, where he says, "A marriage is like a ceramic. It will endure, but it's also very fragile." I thought in the chapter about making the sort of getting the relationship right, I thought that was very meaningful. Anyway, it struck me as true. I don't know about your priorities,
because you genuinely still find pottery thousands and thousands of years later. It is fragile, but it's so resilient too. It's a great little association. Have we got enough time for me to read the one that I think is really funny, which is actually
and then we have to end.
Aware of. Okay, it's the fact that we have to be very careful what we promise as well, and I think it really gets into the heart of, like, it's important to think about what we're doing but not to take ourselves too seriously. It's Tim Key, and it just says, "Be careful of the consequences. Clark kissed his wife on their first wedding anniversary. On their second anniversary, he kissed her twice. On their third anniversary, he kissed her 4 times. And on their fourth, he kissed her 8 times. On their 5th, 6th, and 7th anniversaries, he kissed her 16, 32, 64 times, respectively. By their 10th anniversary, he was kissing her 512 times, and they both developed rashes and were late for their dinner reservation. On their silver wedding anniversary, they perished, exhausted and thirsty. Only 800,005 kisses into the contracted 16,777,216, blinded by romance, killed by mathematics."
That's just brilliant. I love it.
It's wise to think ahead in every relationship.
Oh, do you know, we are going to have to bring this to a close, which is so sad. And we could have gone on for so much longer. I've really loved this evening. And thank you very, very much, Zena and Audrey, for joining us. And I just think anybody who has you as a celebrant for their wedding is incredibly lucky. There's a whole network of humanist celebrants out there. And if you're thinking of getting married, do get in touch with our network and have a wonderful day and a wonderful life after that. It's a very exciting day to be thinking about. You've joined us for all sorts of different reasons tonight. Thank you very much. Some of you, I think, are going to be celebrants, and good luck on that journey. Some of you are going to be getting married very soon. Good luck on that journey. And some of you are maybe just interested in humanism. And I think this is a good place to start thinking about it. As president of Humanist UK, I've felt really proud this evening just to listen to the questions and the experiences of people. We've been reading all of your comments and questions, even if we haven't managed to get around to everybody this evening, but also to hear from our wonderful celebrants. And also to be part of Humanist UK and part of humanism in the UK. We've heard about how humanism is at the forefront of social change, that it stands for equality. And we've talked about why people might choose a humanist wedding, that it's about being who we want to be. It's about loving who we want to love. And it's about then creating your own wedding around that. Over to you, Andrew, for final words.
Well, I think you've summed it up, Alice, and done it very well. But there is one last question we can answer before we leave each other this evening, which is that someone has asked, will there be another new book? Will there be a follow-up? And the answer is yes. It's very good to be able to announce that there will be a little book of humanist funerals out very soon. And we look forward to seeing everyone here again in about a year and a bit for the launch of that. thank you to everyone, all of our participants here and all of you and everyone who's working so hard in Humanist Celebrancy and everything else. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Good night.